They laughed when Captain Riley Thompson walked toward the Apache helicopter, saying women weren't built for combat flying. But when 500 soldiers were trapped behind enemy lines in the largest military disaster in decades, she was about to prove that the most dangerous pilot in the sky doesn't need to be a man. Meet Captain Riley Thompson, 31 years old, steel blue eyes that could cut through fog, short auburn hair that never seemed out of place even after 12-hour flights, and hands that could make an Apache helicopter dance through missile fire like a deadly ballet. She stood 5 feet 6 inches tall, weighed 135 pounds, and could outfly pilots twice her size with half the ego. But none of that mattered to the men at Fort Liberty Army Base in North Carolina. To them, she was still just the woman pilot, a curiosity, an experiment, a political correctness checkbox that the Pentagon had forced on real warriors. They'd never say it to her face, but Riley heard the whispered conversations, saw the eye rolls when she entered the pilot's briefing room, felt the skepticism every time she climbed into an aircraft worth $35 million. Today was different. Today, everything she'd trained for, everything she'd endured, every doubt she'd faced was about to be tested in the most catastrophic way possible. The emergency klaxon began wailing at 0547 hours, cutting through the pre-dawn silence like a knife. Riley was already awake, going through her morning routine in the small quarters she kept meticulously organized: coffee, weather reports, equipment checks, the same ritual she'd followed for 8 years of military service. All pilots to the briefing room immediately. This is not a drill. The voice over the intercom carried an urgency that made Riley's stomach tighten. She'd heard that tone before during her deployment in Syria, when everything went sideways in 30 seconds. She grabbed her flight suit and ran. The briefing room was chaos. 12 pilots crowded around a large tactical display showing satellite imagery that made everyone's blood run cold. Colonel Marcus Hayes, the squadron commander, looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past hour. "Listen up," Hayes barked. At approximately 0430 hours, Bravo Battalion was conducting a routine patrol near the contested zone when they walked into the largest enemy ambush we've seen in 5 years. 500 soldiers, an entire battalion, are pinned down in a valley with no ground-based extraction possible. The room fell silent except for the hum of electronics and the distant sound of helicopters spinning up on the flight line. "The enemy has moved surface-to-air missiles into the surrounding hills," Hayes continued, pointing to the display. "We've lost 2 Chinook helicopters and a Black Hawk in the past 90 minutes trying to get our people out. The weather is deteriorating rapidly. We've got incoming storm systems that will make flying impossible within the next 4 hours." Captain Jake Morrison, the squadron's most experienced pilot, raised his hand. "Sir, with respect, this sounds like a job for Air Force bombers, not helicopters. We can't get close enough to extract anyone with those SAMs active." "The bombers can't help," Hayes replied grimly. "Our people are too close to civilian populations. One wrong bomb and we create an international incident. It has to be precision extraction, and it has to be now." Riley studied the tactical display while the other pilots discussed approach vectors and weapons loadouts. The valley was a death trap. Narrow approach corridors, high terrain on all sides, multiple SAM sites with overlapping coverage. Any helicopter going in would be flying through a gauntlet of surface-to-air missiles, rocket-propelled grenades, and concentrated machine gun fire. "Who's taking the mission?" asked Captain Tommy Rodriguez, though his tone suggested he already knew no one wanted to volunteer for what looked like a suicide run. Hayes looked around the room. "I need volunteers. I won't order anyone to fly this mission. The odds of survival are minimal." Silence stretched for 30 seconds that felt like 30 minutes. Riley could hear her heartbeat in her ears, could feel the weight of every conversation she'd overheard about women not belonging in combat aviation, every joke about female pilots being too emotional for high-stress situations. "I'll take it," Riley said quietly. Every head in the room turned toward her. The silence became deafening. Captain Morrison laughed, actually laughed. "Come on, Riley, this isn't a training exercise. This is 500 lives we're talking about." "I'm aware of that," Riley replied, her voice steady as granite. "Look, sweetheart," said Captain Brad Collins, a pilot who'd never missed an opportunity to remind Riley that she didn't belong, "this requires someone who can handle the pressure, who won't freeze up when the missiles start flying. Maybe you should stick to transport missions." Riley felt the familiar heat of anger rising in her chest, but she'd learned long ago to channel that energy into focus rather than fury. "My flight records speak for themselves. I've logged more combat hours than anyone in this room except Colonel Hayes." Combat hours, flying supplies and personnel, Morrison interjected. This is different. This is life or death decision-making under the most extreme pressure imaginable. Colonel Hayes held up his hand for silence. Thompson, you understand the risks. This isn't just dangerous. It's likely a one-way mission. The math doesn't work in our favor. Riley stepped closer to the tactical display, studying the terrain with the intensity of a surgeon examining an X-ray. Sir, I see 3 possible approach vectors. The northern route takes us through the heaviest SAM coverage but offers the best extraction points. The southern approach is longer but might avoid some of the missile sites. The eastern corridor is suicide, too narrow, too many choke points. Hayes nodded approvingly. If we use a modified nap of the Earth approach, staying below 50 feet until the final approach, we might be able to avoid radar lock until we're committed to the extraction zone. The Apache's countermeasures package should give us a fighting chance against shoulder-fired missiles. And when you get to the LZ, asked Morrison, how exactly do you plan to extract 500 soldiers with 1 helicopter? Riley had been thinking about that exact problem. Multiple trips, fast insertions and extractions, land, load as many as possible, get out, repeat. The Apache can carry 8 fully equipped soldiers if we strip non-essential gear. That's over 60 trips, Collins calculated. The enemy isn't going to let you make 60 trips into their killing zone. Then I guess I'd better fly fast, Riley said simply. The room erupted in arguments. Half the pilots thought she was insane. The other half thought she was both insane and unqualified. But Riley wasn't listening to the debate anymore. She was studying the mission parameters, calculating fuel consumption, plotting waypoints, and preparing mentally for what might be the last flight of her life. Colonel Hayes called for quiet. Thompson, I appreciate your courage, but Captain Morrison is right. This mission requires our most experienced pilot. With respect, sir, Riley said, experience means nothing if the experienced pilots won't take the mission. Morrison's face reddened. I never said I wouldn't. Then volunteer, Riley cut him off. Right now, say you'll fly this mission. Morrison opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence that followed said everything. Hayes looked around the room one more time. Anyone else volunteering? No hands went up, no voices spoke. The room full of combat pilots, men who'd flown through enemy fire and lived to tell about it, sat in silence while a woman half their size volunteered for a mission they all considered impossible. Thompson, Hayes said finally, you're authorized for immediate departure. Take Apache 77 Alpha. It's got the newest countermeasures package and maximum ammunition load. Your call sign for this mission will be Guardian Angel. Riley nodded and headed for the door. Behind her, she heard Morrison mutter to Collins, she'll be dead in 20 minutes. Then we'll have to send a real pilot to clean up the mess. Riley paused at the doorway without turning around. Captain Morrison, when I bring those 500 soldiers home, I expect a public apology for every doubt you've expressed about female pilots. Will that be acceptable? Morrison scoffed. Sweetheart, if you somehow pull this off, I'll personally recommend you for the Medal of Honor. I'll hold you to that, Riley said, and walked out. The flight line was controlled chaos. Ground crews were prepping Apache 77 Alpha with the urgency of a NASCAR pit stop. Riley went through her pre-flight checklist with mechanical precision, but her mind was already in the target zone, visualizing approach angles and extraction patterns. Chief Warrant Officer Maria Santos, Riley's usual co-pilot, appeared at her elbow. Ma'am, respectfully, I'd like to fly this mission with you. Riley looked at her. Santos was young, maybe 25, with the kind of steady nerves that made excellent aircrew. But this wasn't a training mission. Maria, you've got a baby at home. This is likely a one-way trip. Those 500 soldiers have families too, Santos replied. And if we're going to make multiple extraction runs, you'll need someone handling communications, navigation, and weapon systems. You can't do it alone. Riley nodded. Having Santos along would definitely improve their chances, marginally. They climbed into the Apache and began the startup sequence. The twin turboshaft engines wound up with a scream that could be heard for miles. Riley felt the familiar vibration through her body as the helicopter came alive. This machine was an extension of her will, a tool that responded to her thoughts as much as her hands. Guardian Angel, Tower Control. You are cleared for immediate departure. Weather window is closing fast. You've got maybe 3 hours before the storm makes flying impossible. Tower, Guardian Angel, understood. Beginning departure sequence. Riley lifted the Apache off the tarmac and immediately dropped to 50 feet above ground level. This would be a nap of the Earth flight all the way to the target zone, staying low enough to avoid radar detection but high enough to clear obstacles. As they flew toward the contested zone, Santos monitored radio traffic from the trapped battalion. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Enemy forces were massing for what appeared to be a final assault. If those 500 soldiers weren't extracted soon, there might not be anyone left to rescue. Guardian Angel, this is Bravo 6, came a voice over the radio. The transmission was weak and filled with static. We're running low on ammunition and have approximately 40 wounded who need immediate medical attention. Enemy forces are preparing for another assault. Please advise on extraction timeline. Riley keyed her microphone. Bravo 6, Guardian Angel. ETA to your position, 12 minutes. Prepare for immediate extraction. Walking wounded first. We'll take as many as we can carry each trip. Guardian Angel, did you say each trip? Are you planning multiple insertions into this? LZ, affirmative. Bravo 6, we're not leaving anyone behind. There was a pause. Guardian Angel, be advised, this LZ is extremely hot. We've lost 3 helicopters already. Recommend you abort and wait for bomber support. Negative. Bravo 6, bombers can't help you, and we're not waiting. Guardian Angel inbound. Riley pushed the Apache to its maximum low-level speed, skimming over hills and valleys like a mechanical hawk. The landscape blurred past at 150 miles per hour, trees and buildings flashing by in a green-brown smear. Contact, Santos announced, her voice tight with concentration. I've got multiple radar signatures ahead. Looks like 3 SAM sites with overlapping coverage of the target valley. Riley banked left, following a river valley that would take them around the northernmost missile site. Time to target, 8 minutes. Weather's getting worse. I'm seeing lightning ahead. The first missiles came without warning. Riley saw the smoke trails streak past the cockpit before she heard Santos's urgent call. Missiles inbound. Braking left, Riley threw the Apache into a violent evasive maneuver, pulling G-forces that pressed her into her seat like a giant hand. The helicopter bucked and twisted through the air while Santos deployed countermeasures, chaff and flares designed to confuse incoming missiles. 2 more launches, Santos called out. They've got a lock. Riley dropped the Apache into a narrow canyon, flying between rock walls with maybe 10 feet of clearance on each side. The missiles, unable to follow the helicopter's sudden change in direction, impacted harmlessly against the canyon walls. That's why we fly low, Riley muttered, bringing the helicopter back up to operational altitude. They cleared the canyon and saw the target valley spread out before them. It looked like a vision of hell. Smoke from burning vehicles, tracer fire crisscrossing the sky, explosions sending dirt and debris hundreds of feet into the air. And in the middle of it all, 500 American soldiers fighting for their lives. Guardian Angel, Bravo 6. Be advised, LZ is under direct fire. We'll pop smoke to mark our position. Riley saw the purple smoke grenade bloom in a small clearing about the size of a basketball court. Enemy positions on the surrounding hills immediately shifted their fire toward the smoke, turning the landing zone into a maelstrom of bullets and RPG rounds. Santos, I need you to suppress those positions on the eastern ridge while I land. Roger. Engaging targets. The Apache's 30mm chain gun began firing, sending high explosive rounds into enemy positions with devastating accuracy. Santos was a gifted weapons operator, placing each burst exactly where it would do the most damage. Riley brought the helicopter down in a combat landing, fast, hard, and with zero margin for error. The Apache hit the ground with enough force to rattle teeth, but they were down. Load them up, Riley shouted over the intercom. Soldiers began piling into the helicopter's troop compartment. 8 men, all wounded, some barely conscious. Riley counted heads while Santos continued suppressing enemy fire. We're loaded, came the call from the ground. Riley lifted off immediately, climbing just high enough to clear the valley walls before dropping back down to nap of the Earth altitude. Behind them, enemy forces concentrated their fire on empty air. The flight back to base took 15 minutes. Riley set the Apache down at the medical facility, where combat medics immediately began treating the wounded soldiers. She didn't shut down the engines. Fuel and ammunition, she told the ground crew. Fast as you can. Ma'am, said the crew chief, maybe you should take a break. You've been flying for fuel and ammunition, Riley repeated. There are 492 soldiers still out there. The turnaround took 12 minutes. Riley was back in the air before the crew had finished securing the fuel lines. Santos climbed back into the co-pilot seat, her face grim but determined. "How many more trips?" she asked. Riley did the math. 61 more, if we can carry 8 each time. Assuming we don't get shot down. The second insertion was worse than the first. Enemy forces had repositioned their weapons to concentrate on the landing zone. Riley had to approach from a different direction, using a ridgeline to mask her approach until the last possible moment. This time, the soldiers were ready. The moment the Apache touched down, 8 men sprinted toward it while their comrades provided covering fire. The loading took 45 seconds instead of 2 minutes. On the third trip, Riley took enemy fire directly. A burst from a heavy machine gun stitched holes across the Apache's fuselage, missing the engine by inches. Warning lights lit up the cockpit like a Christmas tree. "We've got hydraulic problems," Santos reported. "Backup systems are compensating, but if we lose primary hydraulics, we're done." Riley kept flying. On the fourth trip, an RPG exploded close enough to crack the cockpit glass. On the fifth trip, she had to land under direct mortar fire. On the sixth trip, Santos was wounded by shrapnel that penetrated the aircraft's armor. "I'm fine," Santos insisted, though blood was running down her arm. "Keep flying." By the 10th trip, Riley had extracted 80 soldiers. By the 20th trip, 160 men were safe, but each insertion was becoming more dangerous as enemy forces adjusted their tactics and concentrated more firepower on the landing zone. On the 25th trip, disaster struck. A surface-to-air missile fired from a concealed position struck the Apache's tail rotor. The helicopter immediately began spinning out of control. "Mayday! Mayday!" Santos called over the radio. "Guardian Angel is going down." Riley fought the controls with every ounce of strength and skill she possessed. Without the tail rotor, the Apache wanted to spin like a top, but she could use the main rotor's collective and cyclic controls to partially compensate. "Hold on," she shouted. The helicopter hit the ground hard, bounced once, and came to rest on its side. Riley hung in her harness, stunned but conscious. Santos was unconscious, blood running from a head wound. "Santos, Maria." Riley unbuckled herself and checked her co-pilot's pulse. Strong and steady, she'd live, but she needed medical attention. The radio crackled to life. "Guardian Angel, Bravo 6. We saw you go down. Can you respond?" Riley keyed her microphone. "Bravo 6, Guardian Angel. We're alive, but aircraft is down. Continue holding position. I'm going to try to reach your location on foot." "Negative, Guardian Angel. It's too dangerous. We'll send a squad to extract you." "Bravo 6, you don't have soldiers to spare, and I'm not done with this mission." "How many men are left in your position?" A pause. "Guardian Angel, we've got 298 soldiers remaining." Riley did quick math. She'd already extracted 202 men in 25 trips. Under normal circumstances, she'd call for another helicopter and crew to continue the mission. But there were no other helicopters available, and the weather window was closing fast. She looked at the damaged Apache. The tail rotor was completely destroyed, but the engines were still functional. The main rotor appeared intact. If she could get the helicopter airborne, she might be able to fly it without the tail rotor. But it would be like trying to fly a washing machine. "Santos, can you hear me?" Her co-pilot's eyes fluttered open. "Riley, what happened?" "We got shot down. How do you feel?" "Like I got hit by a truck. Can we fix the bird?" Riley looked at the damage assessment on her cockpit displays. "The tail rotor's gone, but everything else is functional. I might be able to fly her without it." Santos tried to sit up, winced, and lay back down. "Flying without a tail rotor is impossible. The torque will spin us like a top." "Impossible for most pilots," Riley said. "Maybe not impossible for me." She'd read about helicopter pilots in Vietnam who'd managed to fly damaged aircraft home using unconventional techniques. It required constant control inputs, perfect timing, and a complete understanding of rotorcraft aerodynamics. Most importantly, it required accepting that you probably wouldn't survive the attempt. Riley began the engine startup sequence. The Apache's twin-turbo shafts wound up normally, and the main rotor began turning. Without the tail rotor to provide anti-torque, the fuselage immediately began trying to spin in the opposite direction. "This is insane," Santos muttered, but she began working her instruments anyway. Riley pulled collective power and felt the helicopter try to lift off. The moment it left the ground, it began spinning violently. Riley countered with aggressive cyclic inputs, using the main rotor's disc to create lateral thrust that partially offset the torque. It was like trying to balance on a spinning top while juggling chainsaws. Every control input had to be perfect, timed to the millisecond, or the helicopter would spin out of control and crash. Somehow, impossibly, Riley got the Apache airborne and flying toward the landing zone. She couldn't climb above 50 feet, couldn't fly faster than 80 miles per hour, and had to make constant control corrections. But she was flying. Guardian Angel, Bravo 6. Are you actually flying that thing? Affirmative, Bravo 6. Inbound for extraction. Have 8 soldiers ready for immediate loading. Riley brought the damaged Apache down in the landing zone one more time. The soldiers on the ground couldn't believe what they were seeing. A helicopter with no tail rotor, flying in conditions that should have made flight impossible. 8 more soldiers loaded into the aircraft. Riley lifted off again, the helicopter spinning and bucking like an angry bull, but somehow staying airborne. The flight back to base was the longest 15 minutes of Riley's life. Every second, she expected the helicopter to spin out of control and crash, but she held it together through sheer force of will and flying skill that bordered on the supernatural. They landed at the medical facility with a bone-jarring impact that bent the Apache's landing gear, but they were down, and 8 more soldiers were safe. Riley didn't shut down the engines. Fuel, she told the ground crew, and see if you can do anything about the tail rotor. The crew chief stared at the damaged helicopter in amazement. Ma'am, this aircraft shouldn't be able to fly. How did you? Magic, Riley said. How long to fix the tail rotor? Ma'am, we don't have the parts. This bird is grounded. Riley looked at the Apache, then at the sky where storm clouds were building rapidly. She had maybe 90 minutes of flyable weather left and 290 soldiers still trapped in the valley. Santos, how are you feeling? Her co-pilot had been treated by medics and cleared for flight. Like hell, but I can still work the radios and weapon systems. Riley made a decision that would have gotten her court-martialed under normal circumstances. We're going back. All of them. Every single soldier. In this thing. Santos gestured at the damaged helicopter. In this thing. We've proven it can fly. Now we prove it can fly 36 more times. For the next hour and a half, Riley Thompson performed what military historians would later call the most extraordinary display of helicopter piloting ever recorded. 36 times she flew a catastrophically damaged Apache helicopter into a combat zone that had already shot down 3 aircraft. 36 times she landed under direct enemy fire, loaded soldiers, and somehow got the spinning, bucking helicopter back into the air. On the 31st trip, she took so much enemy fire that her cockpit instruments were barely functional. On the 34th trip, fuel was so low that she had to make an emergency landing at a forward operating base. On the final trip, with the storm already beginning to break overhead, Riley loaded the last 8 soldiers and flew through lightning and heavy winds that should have torn the damaged helicopter apart. When she finally set the Apache down at Fort Liberty for the last time, the helicopter literally fell apart around her. The main rotor separated from the mast, the landing gear collapsed, and what was left of the fuselage settled onto the tarmac with a groan of tortured metal. Riley sat in the cockpit for a long moment, hands still gripping the controls, unable to quite believe she was alive. Then Santos's voice came through her headset, weak but triumphant. Guardian Angel, mission complete. All 500 souls accounted for. Riley unbuckled her harness and climbed out of the wreckage. Her legs barely supported her weight. She was covered in hydraulic fluid, blood from Santos's wounds, and sweat. Her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't make a fist. Colonel Hayes was waiting for her on the tarmac, along with what appeared to be half the base personnel and several civilians in suits who Riley assumed were from Washington. The moment her boots touched the ground, every soldier within sight came to attention and saluted. Hayes stepped forward, his eyes suspiciously bright. Captain Thompson, on behalf of the United States Army, I want to thank you for the most extraordinary display of courage and skill I've ever witnessed. Riley returned the salute. Sir, I was just doing my job. No, Hayes said firmly. You did far more than your job. You redefined what we thought was possible. One of the Washington officials stepped forward. Captain Thompson, I'm General Patricia Williams, Army Aviation Command. What you accomplished today will be studied in flight schools for the next century. You've saved 500 lives and proven beyond any doubt that gender has nothing to do with combat effectiveness. Riley nodded. She was too exhausted for speeches, too drained for celebration. All she wanted was a shower and 12 hours of sleep. But first, she had a promise to keep. She found Captain Morrison in the pilot's lounge, surrounded by the other aviators who had declined to fly the mission. The room fell silent when she entered. "Captain Morrison," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet, "I believe you owe me something." Morrison stood up slowly. His face was pale, his expression a mixture of shame and admiration. "Captain Thompson, I was wrong. About everything. About women in combat aviation, about your abilities, about what was possible." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I publicly apologize for every doubt I expressed about female pilots. You've proven that courage, skill, and determination have nothing to do with gender." Riley nodded. "Apology accepted." She paused. "And Captain Morrison?" "Yes, ma'am, I'll be expecting that Medal of Honor recommendation you promised." Morrison smiled for the first time that day. "Already written, ma'am, already written." 3 months later, Captain Riley Thompson stood in the Rose Garden of the White House, wearing her dress uniform and receiving the Medal of Honor from the President of the United States. The citation read, in part, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of her life above and beyond the call of duty while serving as pilot of an Apache helicopter during combat operations." Captain Thompson's extraordinary heroism and selfless devotion to duty resulted in the successful evacuation of 500 soldiers from certain death. But Riley's greatest satisfaction came from the letter she received a week later from the Army Aviation School. They were implementing new training protocols based on her techniques for flying damaged aircraft, and they wanted her to develop the curriculum. For the first time in military history, female pilots wouldn't have to prove they belonged in combat aviation. Riley Thompson had proven it for all of them. The woman who was told she wasn't built for combat flying had redefined what combat flying could be. And in doing so, she'd saved 500 lives and changed military aviation forever. Sometimes the most impossible missions require not the strongest pilot or the most experienced pilot, but the pilot who refuses to accept that impossible means impossible. Riley Thompson was that pilot, and her story became legend, not because she was a woman, but because she was extraordinary.